Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, episode 29. I know it's getting close to Christmas, but we're still here. We've still got stuff to talk about, and I know that it's going to be interesting today because we've got Lee from West Australia joining us,
Hello.
and we're going to be talking about Ros Ward, Enraged Lefties, and I guess you could say identity politics as well as the Registered Organisation Bill.
hmm
So, unfortunately, we don't have any of the left libertarians on today, which will be interesting. So, I'm basically going to be taking a lot of stabs at their favorite, at their idol almost, and it's going to go completely unchallenged because none of them decided to turn up. Isn't it
Well,
fantastic?
we are libertarians, so I could be contrarian. I mean, it's not hard. I think all of us are written like that, so I can
Yeah,
try and
sure,
challenge it.
sure. If you reckon you can pass the ideological Turing test, and
Probably not, but I'll give it a go.
yeah, give it a shot. But anyway, so yeah, I guess Trump won, and there have been loads of protests going on in
You
the United
guess.
States. Yeah, I guess the God Emperor Trump elect.
Yeah.
I'm having a great time joking about that, and I remember like ages ago on this show, I was just like, you know what? I just want to watch the world burn, and Trump will guarantee that. And I'm basically like that dog right now, going with the world on fire around, going, this is fine.
This is fine. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. Well, some people
Um,
do think it's the end of the world, including one Ros Ward, who. Do you want me to explain?
assaulted someone with a Trump hat.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
for those who are not aware who she is one of the authors, I think, of the Safe
she,
Schools
she,
program.
she's the author of the Safe School
Yeah.
program.
And basically, she's been a lightning rod kind of for the right in terms of venting their hate at her over safe schools. And she was
Which,
seen on the weekend at an anti-Trump rally
yeah,
accosting a Trump supporter, trying to take his hat off. And
correct,
yep,
correct. It's not accosting. What she did is technically, and I mean technically in the very legal sense, called assault.
sure.
Yeah. And
If
if
she
there were
touched
charges,
the end of his nose with her finger, it would be assault. So assault's not exactly like a very hard standard to reach. To be
correct,
fair to her,
correct.
yep.
Assault is not a high standard, but technically,
Technically, it was
she
assault.
assaulted.
Yep,
Technically, she assaulted him,
yep,
almost progressing up to battery.
yep.
So, um, as much as I would love to get into that sort of thing, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll leave that to the lawyers to discuss, or
Yep.
sometime when Zeev gets on,
Yep.
can discuss that. But moving aside, I actually have grievances over why she is the target for why the Safe Schools program is so bad. Right? The Safe Schools program is bad for a large number of other reasons. The biggest being the fact that it is effectively an Orwellian sort of re-education program, right? And I mean strictly from like a 1984 sense of re-education. And there's this concept of left-wing authoritarianism that has sort of escaped I guess you could say, the regular vernacular of discussion. It was something that Orwell originally brought up when he was talking in 1984 and in Animal Farm, the idea of left-wing authoritarians. And even though that was there in the popular culture back in the day, it's kind of disappeared, and largely due to the fact that you have these educational institutions that are so radically left-wing that they've managed to convince people now for a generation that there is no such thing as left-wing authoritarianism. And these programs don't get called out for what they are. There's all sorts of tiptoeing around it by going,
Well,
oh, look at
I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe because I got a lot of conservative mates, particularly conservative Christian mates, they've been frothing at the mouth over safe schools. So I don't
yeah,
think
no,
on
they've
specifically
been,
safe schools, it's gone
yeah, but
lacking.
conservative Christians aren't arguing about the concept of re-education itself, right? They
Sure.
would like to they would like to re-educate, right?
Yeah, some
Their
of them would.
entire yeah, huh?
Some of them would, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what the chaplaincy program is, right?
Yeah, sort of, maybe.
Sort,
Not
sort
really.
of.
No, not really. But anyway, I can see how it could be seen that way.
There was a Section 116 challenge on the chaplaincy thing, which did target exactly that specific point, that it was sort of like a sort of a backdoor to introduce Christian teaching
Oh, that I want to disagree about, but I don't think it's a re-education program. I think for a lot of Christians, it's evangelism through the back door.
Okay, sure,
Which is different. But anyway, let's leave that aside. But yeah, certainly, if you want to talk about like the counterpoint to a lot of the sort of gender theory and stuff on the left, like the opposite is probably true on the right. That there is people who would, if they had their way, no one would ever talk about anything but heterosexuality and marriage, and that's kind of it. And all other talk would be kind of verboten.
Yeah, pretty much. I would agree with that statement, absolutely. And that's why a lot of what I see as gender theory, or whatever's been described as gender theory, and based on what people link me to go, hey, what do you think about this? And they link me this person who's talking about, identity, like some form of identity politics, or like someone, like my favorite thing is where people say like, I don't understand identity politics, or I don't understand feminism. And they link me a video on feminism, which they think will explain it to me. But I sit there and I go, like, this is just someone saying, I have feels, and you should acknowledge my feels, right? And it's in a very verbose way to get to that point. But
certainly on the issue of a cultural appropriation, I think, for me personally, like that's something that I've come up with my lefty mates. I've sort of just ended up thinking, well, this is just about hurt feelings, which is fine. Like, I mean, if you wear an traditional Indian headdress or Native American Indian headdress, and then somebody who that's the cultural icon for them in their own ethnicity, sure, they can be like, I'm not like mad that they're upset, like, but that's sort of, it goes way beyond that. It's sort of it's
almost like an authoritarian, I own this. It's kind of...
Yeah, well, they bring the language of property to feelings.
It is actually a form of racism, so cultural appropriation. It's like, this is my cultural boundary sort of thing, and you may not enter. And it's kind of weird because, like, when someone appropriates a part of your culture, you haven't lost your culture.
No.
Right? It's propagated as an idea elsewhere. And in fact, like, I'm sitting there and going, like, successful cultures want that.
Yep.
Right? Because that's how you propagate your culture, is when people buy into it. So to me, it just A, doesn't make sense, and B, it's borderline racist.
Okay, so from what I understand of their perspective, like, we're getting way away from Roswell and Donald Trump. But anyway,
but we're discussing identity politics.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I think their definition of racism is not discrimination based on ethnicity.
No, it's discrimination based on power in the society.
Yeah. So it's about power relationships and oppression and that kind of stuff, which is stupid because power dynamics change over time, right? Well, yes, yeah, sure. I don't think
and I would definitely argue that it's definitely not the case that it's based on power dynamics anymore. So, for example, if you looked at universities, right?
Yeah.
Universities, especially in Australia, especially in the Western world, right, are majority white Western women, right?
Yep.
So the power dynamic at a university is, if you are not a white Western woman, you are a minority.
Yep. Sure. Yeah, and I think, and also, I mean, I guess one of this sort of, when I talk about this with my mates, when we get into the weeds about it, I say, well, what about oppressed European minorities? Because quite often they don't seem to, like, basically you've got white people, which is anybody who's ever come from Europe that has got any shade darker than African.
Yeah, and
like, they're all one group, and then everybody else is all different ethnicity and specifics. Yeah. Well, firstly, the Irish were, like, starved to death by the English. The Ukrainians were starved to death by the Russians. You've got Jews, like, like probably the most persecuted minority in the history of the human race. You've got a lot of, like, they're basically, and even if you say, well, let's talk about culture, well, even Anglo-Saxon is technically not British culture. Like, they were, like, the French essentially invaded England and ruled over Britain. Therefore, if you are a descendant of the original inhabitants of England, does that make you an oppressed minority? like it's so complicated, and often it's such a simplistic view that doesn't even take any of the intricacies of even intra-European politics, let alone the relationship between Europeans and everybody else.
Which is why we're both in agreement and saying it's clearly not based on the definition that they give. Right? It's clearly not based on power dynamic. Because if you do base it on power dynamic, it doesn't reflect any of the power dynamics either of us would see.
No, I think they're probably genuine in saying that. I think their read of power dynamics is simplistic.
Yeah.
I mean, and I say that as somebody who hasn't, not like read a whole lot of intersectional theory. So maybe there is somebody out there who's putting forward a nuanced argument, and for the sake of us non-lefties, my lefty mates are just boiling down to simple things. So, they could actually have that understanding. I mean, I don't think they do. Especially, I mean, I think the issue of the Jews, I'm not one of these people who's all about Israel all the time, but I think if you really want to talk about oppressed minorities, the Jews are probably going to be a serious point of discussion, because no one can really say that they have not been appallingly treated. And quite often when they talk about racism, I don't see any Jewish faces in their campaigns.
No.
And I mean, anti-Semitism is a thing even now,
especially in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, especially in the Middle East, but even in Europe and the Western world. I mean, especially in Europe, lesser degree to the US and Australia, but anti-Semitism is a real thing.
Yeah,
and racism is a real thing, but I don't think it's widespread.
No, but just to kind of bring it back to, it's the reason why. So here's the thing, right? My main gripe with safe school. Well, my main gripe isn't with safe schools. My main safe schools are very simple to understand, right? It's effectively like a safe space, except you're turning the entire school into a safe space. And effectively, what you're doing is you're trying to control the language that people use, right?
Sure.
Or the language that children use. And the hope is that you basically educate a whole bunch of children buying into identity politics at a very young age.
Yep.
Now, the problem I have is the actual concept of identity politics in the first place.
Yep.
It's because identity politics seems to borrow the group dynamic aspects, the oppression and oppressed categories that Marxism comes up with, and then binds it to individualistic characteristics in the way that not libertarians, but the I want to say the Mises, the Hans Hermann Hoppe natural elites, sort of slightly racist school of libertarian side, which go you have these certain traits, therefore you just happen to be naturally, kind of like white people were just meant to rule the world, sort of thing.
Right.
That side, that David Duke and Hans Hermann Hoppe sort of ascribe to, but it somehow merges both of those two together, and then combines it and says, you know what, there are groups of people that are like this. There are groups of people that will rule the world and all sorts of things. And it is actually quite racist. And it is, in some aspects, it's also slightly dangerous. So, for example, take the issue of transgender people. So gender dysphoria is an actual medical condition. It is a mental illness, and you should absolutely seek treatment for it, right? But then you've got these, and I want to say, androgynous fairies that are basically attention-seeking fuckwits, right? Who don't have a mental disorder, who just want to be special, who are attending university and just want to join a special club of freaking, attention-seeking troglodytes. And basically, those people diminish the actual, I want to say, actual mental illness that is going on for people who suffer from gender dysphoria, who do need to get the help and who do need our support as a society. And when these people make such a mockery of that, I actually really, really hate these people, because they are delegitimizing an actual issue, an actual thing that needs to be treated with care.
What do you mean by delegitimize? I don't quite know what you mean. As in by saying that they are transgender or something? I'm not sure.
So they don't say they're transgender, right? But what they say is it's kind of like transgender, and you'll hear this a lot, right? They'll say it's gender fluid. I feel masculine one day, I feel feminine one day, aka every freaking human on the planet. And then they say, so therefore, but it's like transgender. And I'm sitting there going, no, it's not. Transgender is gender dysphoria, right? You've got these chemicals in your head that are fucking up your, what you actually, you don't feel like the body that you're in is the gender that you're supposed to be. It is a mental condition. It's a serious thing, right? Your little, I feel like wearing man clothes, or I feel like wearing a skirt, that is just a feeling, right? It is literally just, it's you wanting to be special. And I don't mind that. Right? But when you go ahead and start saying, it should be treated like part of the rest of the LGBTI issues, right? That's when I take issue with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about I mean, okay, you take issue with that. I don't know if that is delegitimizing, but I guess
It
the
delegitimizes it
overall
because if I sit there and tell you that you're being a special fucking fairy, right? All of a sudden now they're saying it's transphobic. It is not
right.
transphobic.
Okay.
It is not transphobic at all, right? That is me telling you, like, basically, get your head out of your ass. There is nothing special about you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
But I kind of equate it with like those people who walk out in military uniforms, right? Who aren't military personnel. The stolen valor kind of people, right? They're out there to
Yeah,
try and
I
get
mean,
attention.
I mean, I guess like at a level of self-expression, like it's not wrong to want to. So leaving aside the whole calling people transphobic because you disagree, which I think is just poor form in any circumstance. Like, I mean, unless it's actually like genuine stoking fear of transgender people. Like, I mean, generally, I think transphobic and racist and all that sort of stuff is overused as
Yeah,
ways of describing people. So, leaving that aside, just talking about, like these people who you say are delegitimizing. I mean, I guess they're wanting to express themselves in a certain way. And,
that's fine.
And they
That's fine.
want to
Just don't
be
attach.
accepted at a
That's
societal
fine. Just
level.
don't attach yourself to the LGBTI. That's what I'd say.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess
Don't. This is you being a theater kid. That's fine.
Yeah,
Just
I don't
do
know.
not attach to it.
I don't. I mean, it's
That-
up to
that-
it's,
that's-
it's
that's
up to
my-
other people in the LGBTI, community to determine whether they should be in there or not.
Fine. Then let's start a new community called the actual people, right?
Well,
and then leave the crazies out of it. Because like I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I don't want these people attached to it because, like I said, I actually see them as harming the rest of the community.
okay, well, I don't think that's how it quite works. I mean, think about the libertarian movement. There's plenty of, like
But I call
the
them
fractional
shit
reserve
libertarians.
banking people. Do I think
Yeah, and I
that
call them
makes
shit
libertarian
libertarians.
look stupid? Yes,
And
I think
I
they
call-
do. Should
yeah.
we just purge them? Well, it's
I'm
not really
saying
up to
purge
me.
them. I'm not saying purge them. I'm saying call them shit libertarians.
Okay.
Right? Or in this case, I'd call them shit people in general. Right? Because they are actually just very shit people.
Yeah, see, I mean, I guess my experience of someone like Andy Moore, who we've had on this show, who I think,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he's pretentious or anything, but I think he would defend these sorts of people and their desire to be part of the overall LBGTI sort of
He's wrong.
push
That's
for.
what I'm just going to say.
Okay, fine,
just
but
gonna say
like,
he's-
I think from his perspective and a perspective of people like him, I think they would say that it is part of it's part of an overall movement to sort of
Yeah, but they're wrong.
Can I let me finish before I say wrong? Like, you wanted me to defend them,
Yeah,
and now I'm defending them. So just shut up, all right?
Go.
Like they, I guess gender expression, like it's sort of a broader push for sort of opening up the concept of gender expression, which in and of itself is okay. Like, I don't have a problem with that. I mean,
Sure.
I mean, at the
don't
like,
have trans people
can girls play with Tonka trucks and boys play with Barbies? Why not? Like, and I think that's a genuinely that is a thing that's worth defending. I think like the notions of people being able to freely choose. Like we don't have these categories where this is what boys do and this is what girls do.
Right now, all stuff is just marketing. Right. It's not like parents like are forced. Like, okay, so there's a boys section and a girls section. That doesn't mean you can't go into the girls.
So, I mean, aside from that, which I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's more the attitudes that underlie it. That's what they're going after, and I think that is worth going after to an extent. Like, I mean, I'm a conservative Christian. I believe there is male and female with strong differences. Like, and that's how God has created humanity. So I'm not one of these people who says
So-
I am personally part of a spectrum because I think God created me to be a guy. And that could mean a bunch of things.
So personally, I have no problem accepting that there's a spectrum, right?
Yep.
But that's fine. That's fine for academic debates and everything like that. But where it counts, right? And I'm talking medical, and I'm talking, disease prevention, and I'm talking disease treatment, right? In all these areas, the only thing that matters is your biological gender, and that's it, right?
Sure.
And as far as I'm concerned, right? In those specific cases, right, you should not do anything to harm people who are like going through serious issues in those cases.
Yep.
And that is my main complaint about what all these people who call themselves gender fluid do.
Okay, well, I think for those who I know who would describe themselves as gender fluid, and I know a few people who are probably like that, like probably less than 5. Like I seriously doubt they would see it that way. That they are hurting people who have gender dysphoria, and certainly the only people I know who have gender dysphoria wouldn't themselves describe gender fluid doing that either. So to maybe you do, but I guess to to take the approach they take, like you're not part of that community necessarily. I mean, sure. I don't know. Maybe you secretly are, whatever. Like have gender dysphoria. Like I'm not gonna. We haven't had that conversation.
I'll just put on a wig. No, I'm kidding. No, I don't have any of those issues. But like the thing is, I sit there, like I have an objection to it based on what I see.
Sure.
Right, and that's why I have like a strong aversion to this particular subset of the community. The rest of the community, I have none of an issue with. Right, just this tiny aspect, which I think is actually a cancer on it. Now, it could be that everybody is just going like, you know what? I'll just accept the fact that they are a cancer.
Yep.
Right? It could be that they're actually not. They're actually contributing something. But you won't know until that discussion's actually had, and I don't think they've had that proper discussion.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think I guess I take it like most of this stuff. I take a thin libertarian approach, which is it's none of my business. I don't really care. It doesn't affect me, which is actually my approach to safe schools. Like, I have no problem that the safe school exists as a program. I have a problem with the government funding it and the government making schools do it. But, like, in terms of just its actual existence, it doesn't bother me.
So I'm a little bit two-faced on this because, like, I'm a thin libertarian in terms of policy, right? But in terms of social commentary, fuck no. I have loads of opinions and I just let it all go. So, yeah, I mean, like, I would say I am very much a thick libertarian from the perspective of opinions, right? But I would never advocate any of my opinions be put into public policy actions.
Sure. Well, I mean that's the nature of libertarianism, isn't it? Like it wouldn't be, like if you're advocating for the government to push that policy, chances are you're not libertarian. So let's
touche. Yeah. So,
maybe we should just like pivot back to the whole sort of identity politics and Trump specifically, because that's where we sort of started. And I think we're not going to really get into the registered organization thing because we've only got like 6 minutes. But
well, we've actually got 8 minutes, but yeah.
8 minutes, fine.
But yeah. So I actually find it interesting that Trump actually identity politics itself has spawned a identity movement that's built around Trump. It's that's found Trump as its sort of head, as its figurative head. And it's interesting because like they've spent so many years demonizing effectively white males.
Yeah.
Right? And if you take a look at the majority of people who voted for Donald Trump, yes, it is white males, right? But
it's also Hispanics. Like Hispanics voted more for Trump than as a percentage but like they went out more for Trump than for Hillary. And rural people went out more for Trump, but they still went out for Hillary as well. Like she had an increase of like 300,000 votes from rural locations for Hillary.
But nothing as much as what Trump had. So I mean, there is something to be said that identity politics has basically created a Trump voting class. I don't think that Trump voting class would have existed if identity politics didn't exist.
I don't think so. Like, so there was a great article put out by I think it was the Star State Codex or Star Slate Codex.
Star Slate.
Yeah, Star Slate, I think it was. Which was, I can't remember the article, but it was to do with the Trump and voting. And basically, this person went to the time of actually kind of figuring out how big is the alt-right. And in this person's estimation, and we don't know who it is because it was an anonymous author, they reckon there's like 50,000 people who are part of the alt-right, like at most.
Based on what I see on YouTube.
Yeah, but going by like 4chan and Reddit and, like Breitbart and like kind of sort of, it takes a few approaches of trying to sort of figure out, well, where do we find the alt-right and how can we sort of measure them? And it's, 50,000 people out of 320 million people is not a whole lot.
50,000 people in the United States?
In the alt-right.
Yeah, possible. Yeah, 50,000. I would say it's a couple million around the world. So 50,000 in America sounds about right.
Yeah, well, maybe 50. I mean, yeah, it's hard to know. But, I mean, I think if you look at kind of what happened with with the actual exit polls.
The alt-right isn't the voting contingent. The alt-right is the one controlling the language,
yeah,
right?
Sure.
So
they're the Trump fan club. They're the hardcore
yeah,
of the Trump fan.
Yeah. So it's how's the best way to? There's a great CDP Grey one on this, where if you take a look at how democracy functions, he's got like an animation on it, on functions of democracy, and the reality is like the most vocal voices are a tiny fraction of the support base, because the vast majority of voters,
firstly, they don't vote. Secondly, out of that percentage,
so they don't vote, and then there's also the potential, like, it's called the follower dynamic, I think it was called. Okay. But basically, that they have a vague vague notion of support.
Yeah.
But they're likely to be pushed aside by strong rhetoric.
Sure.
And
that's the nature of all sorts of aspects
nature of
democracy.
Politics and democracy. Yeah.
But I mean, I think if you look at Trump, so you say, okay, there is this identity politics core, which is the alt-right.
Yeah.
They really popped up about the same time as Trump, and Trump came to represent them rather than they spawned Trump. Really, like, the alt-right's really come about.
I'd say they started around Mizzou. And all those
So, but like we're talking like in the last 2-3 years. Like, it's not. Yeah. We're not talking about an intellectual movement that's been around since forever. So we're talking about the last 2-3 years, and Trump has come to sort of become that figurehead for that movement. But really, if you think about like what the broad voting base of America, it's more going to be in the fact that he's a nativist and a protectionist, and anti-immigration and those sorts of, like, that strain of nationalist populist has been around forever, and it's been on both the left and the right, and heck, we've seen it even in this election alone. Like, Hillary's kind of co-opted that, and Bernie Sanders represented it. So, I mean, I think that's actually probably more explains Trump, and also Clinton being a terrible candidate. Like, if they had anybody but Bernie or Clinton, heck, even Martin O'Malley, like, just anybody, like, it would have been, I think, a very different election.
I actually think, if you actually take a look at the numbers, it looked like, so less than 50% of the population voted, as opposed to 53% of the population previously.
Sure.
What it actually looks like is that Donald Trump was able to convince more people not to vote for Hillary Clinton, or even vote in general, right, than to increase his vote. Like, he did increase his vote, but not anywhere near as much as he seemed to decrease Hillary's vote. And I suspect
Hillary decreased her own. As well.
She probably decreased her own. I also suspect the fact that all the polls were saying that she's got like a 95% chance to win, like, before Election Day.
Yep.
Right? Like, there's that famous Huffington Post article the day before the election, which said 95% chance for a Clinton victory. Right? She was out in New York when they were giving her book saying "Madam President."
Yeah.
Right. She didn't even write a concession speech.
Yeah.
Right. This is a lot like when Dewey defeated.
When Truman defeated Dewey.
Truman defeated Dewey. Dewey. Yeah, I got it the other way around. So Dewey was ahead in the polls, miles ahead in the polls. Right. And all of his voters went like, "Well, he's miles ahead in the polls." And they just didn't bother turning up. So I reckon that might have actually had a huge part to do with it as well.
So I just brought up on my computer. So this is from Unbiased America. It's November 14. They collated all the exit polls to sort of give a changes in the demographics.
You realize Unbiased America is like
a lefty outfit?
Yeah,
that's fine. But I mean, they're just pulling together the data from like all the exit polls. So it's like data collected by Edison Research for the National Election Pool from ABC News, the Associated Press, CBS News, CNN, Fox, and NBC. So basically all the major news networks, this is like pulling it together. So in terms of changes of turnout, Hillary, like the Democrats, so Clinton had about 4.5 million less voters compared to 2012.
Yep.
And Trump got about 500,000 more voters than Romney.
There you go.
So yeah, like people kind of did. I mean, they were okay with Trump, but they really hated Clinton. And Trump did better in terms of sort of net benefit of changes in turnout with high school less people Democrats. He did better than, like, Clinton had 3 million less Democrats vote for her, and Trump had about 800,000 more Democrats vote for him. Yeah. Men, blacks, Clinton lost about 2 million of the black vote, and Trump got actually an increase in the black vote. Rural voters, she got smashed in. Straight voters both stayed at home for both of them, but almost twice as many for Clinton. Young people, Hispanics, independents, urban and white. They're all the groups that went for Trump. Like the turnout was in his favor.
Yeah, there you go.
It was only changes so Clinton just drubbed Trump amongst college voters, college educated or better voters, Republicans, old people, gay people, and women. And women actually, she lost 2 million voters, nearly 2 million voters from 2012, but Trump lost like 2.3 million. So
the grab him by the pussy comment, right?
Yeah. So I mean, like if you look at that, it's hard to sort of say, well, identity politics spawned Trump. Certainly
Identity politics spawned the entire movement around Trump. That's what I was saying.
Well,
if you take a look
at alt-right, yes, but I don't think the rest of it is identity politics.
All of his rhetoric has been like entirely what the alt-right has been feeding him, which is actually like, well, actually no, that's
except all the trade stuff and all. I mean, all the trade stuff.
Well, the alt-right is opposed to trade. That's the thing that's weird. They're not conservatives in the way that we would look at them. They're not free market. Yeah. They're fair market. That's what they keep saying. Fair market.
So, I mean, the alt-right in some ways mimics kind of the progressive left. But I actually don't think that makes up the bulk of the...
They are a mirror image of the Sanders movement. Yeah. I'm not kidding.
Sure.
Right? So, yeah, like, that's just the way I see it.
Well, like we've said it a couple of times, like the whole One Nation Greens thing.
Yeah, we've gone a little bit over. Why don't we just go over and actually discuss the registered organizations one as well?
Sure, okay.
Yeah. So, the ABCC is still up in the air, but registered organizations came through, and I'm actually, having read a lot of it, I kind of approve of it.
Yep. So do you want to explain what it's all about?
Yeah. So the Registered Organizations Act basically treats superannuation firms, which are very union dominated, forces them to be regulated kind of like banks. So they need to be more upfront about fees. They need to be more upfront about... So people might not be aware of this. Your retail super fund has to actually list your fees, but your industry super fund, which if some of you are actually in like Australian Super or Rest or any one of those big industry super funds, you might notice that they say they don't charge fees, but your fees are like aggregated as a lower return on the thing, which is a pretty dodgy way to get around saying, you don't have any fees, but basically it's just a way of hiding the actual fees that you pay.
Wasn't there stuff to do with the corporate governance of unions as well?
I was also going to say, yeah. So also unions and professional organizations are now treated in the same way a company would be. Yeah. So they've actually got to do BAS statements. They've actually got to do general reporting. It's actually quite fantastic that the Labor Party just opposed all of this stuff. I'm sitting there going like, it's a really hard argument for them to make that they can self-regulate but nobody else can.
Yeah.
And the fact that the media is like going like, oh, it's an attack on the unions already, it's indicative of a certain level of media bias. Realistically, I mean, to normal people, it's like if you say a union is treated exactly the same as a company, people will be like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Was it not the case before? It seems like a strange opposition thing to oppose.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's lots of other organizations that aren't treated like corporations.
Yeah. So
not-for-profits and charities and stuff, I guess.
Well, they'll have an ABN. They do have to fill out BASs, and they do have to.
Do they? Okay, all right.
So no, unfortunately not. Charities are classified under our current Corporation
Act. Okay, well that's fine. I mean, yeah, I guess. Yeah, well, I mean, there's a good reason why the unions have got away with not being treated like corporations. That's because the Labor Party
has been covering.
Yeah, I mean, Labor Party is run by special interests. They're run by the unions.
Yeah. So the thing is, things have been brought in. I think the only things that haven't been brought into line with corporations laws are things like trusts, which are very difficult to bring into corporations laws because they're not a corporation, right? Yep. It's like you going out and saying, we're all going to pool our money, and that money is going to behave in this particular way, and then the only time the government gets involved is when the money is taken out of the trust, and that's for taxation purposes.
Yeah.
So trusts, I don't think will ever be brought into corporations law. To be treated like corporations, because it doesn't actually make sense to.
Yeah.
And I would suspect that religion as well would be. Churches would be the other one.
Yeah.
And that's because there are cultural organizations. Actually, cultural organizations are probably another example of things that aren't brought in line with corporations. Nor would it make very much sense to actually do that, because they're a very they're more of a money pit than than a company. They're not actually producing anything.
Yeah.
Or providing a service. But yeah. So I personally think that this is a good piece of legislation. I can't believe it wasn't done years and years ago, but now it's here. I'm glad it got through.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it makes me wonder, so generally when people say, well, it's unfair that charities aren't taxed, and I'll say, well, let's not tax corporations then. My view is if there's somebody who's more regulated and somebody who's less regulated, then it's better to make the more regulated people less regulated rather than start regulating the less regulated person more.
Ideally, that's where I'd want to go.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I wonder to what extent that should be the case with corporations. So, I mean, I guess... Yeah. Well, I suppose, like libertarians, it's a funny thing. Like, we say we want less taxes, but if somebody gets a tax break because they lobby for it, we say that's a bad thing. So I guess it's one of those things like where you've got a special interest that have given themselves an exemption through the process of politics, that, they shouldn't
you can
have
call
that
it
exemption.
Rent-seeking.
Yeah. So it is because of rent-seeking. So I guess in that regard, it's a good thing that they've brought them under the purview of corporations. I mean, especially all the super stuff. Like, that's an obvious, an egregious example of where they're getting a special benefit.
Yeah. I would say the most obvious thing that I would say would happen is if corporate regulation and union regulations are tied together, theoretically that should create a bipartisan movement for deregulation.
Yep.
Theoretically. Now,
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah. Now, I don't know how that'll play out. Maybe Labor will try and find a way to decouple it. But the question is really if the Liberal Party, I laugh because, I was normally called them the Nationals. But yeah, if Malcolm Turnbull and his team not Malcolm Turnbull, but the next Liberal opposition is effective in keeping the Labor Party on its heels, and keeping that link alive, right? So if they try to sever that link, it becomes a massive... Yeah, which they will. That's the first thing they're going to do when they get into government. So it's got to be an issue for the public to say that unions and corporations should be treated the same. And that's something that Malcolm Turnbull and his team have as a challenge for the next 2 years, is to convince people that this is a very important piece of legislation, and it's not just because it's not just because it potentially harms workers in the union movement. It's because it has potential implications for wider corruption in the political system, and unfortunately, they weren't able to prove that with the Royal Commission. So, take that as you will.
Yeah, sure. All right, well, that probably back covers it all. We've gone for 40 minutes.
Yep.
We've clocked in. We've done our time. We can now clock out.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know if this is the most exciting episode people will see because it's just the two of us.
Well, you've got me into a discussion about the culture wars, which I normally try to avoid. So, that's an achievement.
Yeah, and Tim is probably sitting there going,
Tim is probably frothing right now. Tim Wilms.
Yeah.
Love you, guy.
Yeah, love you, mate. But we'll, I guess we'll do this again next week.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
See everyone.
Thanks. Oh, actually, before we go, you should subscribe to us on YouTube and like us on Facebook because, that's a thing.
That's a thing now, yes. I can't believe I forgot to say that. Yeah. I feel like I should record it and then we should add it at the end of every episode. Yeah.
We could do that. Yeah.
So, like, comment, subscribe, and like us on Facebook.
Yep. Fantastic. All right. See you all next week.
Bye.